Praise though.
And then when she had to take they just shouldn't do that. You're right. They should. They should not do that to people. That's the concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, love it. Look at you, very on time.
I figured once I said
Are we even
like,
at
oh
that?
yeah, I get that.
I don't think so.
Not an on time.
No, not at all. But just because our lives are
Yeah.
All right, everybody, folks. Gonna get this show on the road. Go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Really do appreciate this. My name is Eugene Oba. Welcome to Political Journalism. Where do we go from here? That's the one question of, I think, many questions tonight that we're going to be answering. I'm the co-founder and vice president of Common Sense Entertainment, an independent multimedia production company based in DC, an award-winning production company at that. Just had to throw that in there. I also freelance at Bloomberg, and I am a board member of the Journalism Alumni Network, which is bringing you this event along with the UMD School of Public Policy. This is a collaboration, so we are glad to have that here. And I also want to welcome our YouTube audience that are watching this live right now. So great to have you guys here. And, as you guys know, we are in a new year, a new semester. Your textbook's probably collecting a little bit of dust right now as we speak. And in case you haven't noticed, we are in a brand new administration, and all. So I'm not even sure that the time that we're going to be having to discuss what's going on this evening is going to be enough. But what I do hope, what we hope you guys are going to get out of this is a greater understanding of the political journalism landscape at large, the how, the why, and what's next, why we got here, in this time. And I want to empower all of you with the tools if you guys want to enter political journalism now. Quickly, show of hands. How many of you are interested in political journalism or want to have a career in political journalism? Show of hands. So a lot of you,
Many friends.
a lot of you here tonight. So, again, I hope that this is a great learning opportunity for everybody. And we are going to go ahead and get things rocking here, okay? And remember that the First Amendment as well, I just want to say this because there's been a lot of talk about where journalism is at. Remember that journalism is the only profession that is protected by the Constitution, by our First Amendment. So always keep that in mind. So we've got 4 great people who are going to be helping us answer the question that we have here tonight as to where we go from here. So joining us here tonight are John Ronquillo, professor of the School of Public Policy here at the University of Maryland, the director of the Institute for Public Leadership, and he's our moderator for this evening. Brie Jackson joins us here, former Washington correspondent, NBC News. Good to have you here. Good to have everybody here. Megan Pratz, senior politics editor for NPR. Nice to have you here. And Sarah Oates, professor here at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, associate dean of research and director of PhD studies here at this school. So, folks, welcome. It is great to have all of you here, and all. It is, again, a lot to talk about here this evening, to say the least. And, we'll get to the meat and potatoes of this in just a second with John here. But first, I want you all to know we will have a Q&A session at the end of this. The mic is right there, okay? So I'll come back up here. You guys get in line. We'll answer as many questions as we can within the next hour or so. And I want to direct your attention to the dry erase at the end. On Twitter, we've got a little hashtag that we've come up with, political jur, UMD. So use that on X or Twitter or whatever it is these days. Tag the Merrill College and UMD Public Policy in your tweets. I may weave some of those tweets in this discussion here. And for those of you on Insta, Okay, Jan at UMD. Okay, so let's go ahead and get those stuff going. All right, and with that, I now turn it over to John.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good evening. Thinking a lot in his journey. I want to start with a bit of an easier, because we are, Eugene mentioned our new administration. There is a historical component, not to get too wonkish, but not since Grover Cleveland we've seen a return after being ousted from the White House. The question that I want to ask, just an easy, quick response from everyone, is have we really already been here, or is what we're about to experience going to be different? Brie, I'm going to start with you since you're
it's going to be different. I think this is, as we saw during the first Trump administration, this is just a different, this is not a traditional. I think with the no holds bar, there's nothing really holding him back this second presidency. It's going to be different. I don't think we'll see something. I don't think we're going to be able to point to some time in history where we saw something like what I'm expecting to happen with.
I would agree. What I do think is that Trump himself provided a roadmap to what this certainly the first will look like. If you sort of line up executive orders and actions, we've memos. These are all things that he outlined in cases. They were certainly easy to find on the Trump 47 policy website. So what is surprising in some ways is the level of surprise when he really did try to sort of be like, that's exactly what I'm going to do, and now he's doing it. What I think is the best way to understand what's different is that this is a Trump presidency where there are no guardrails. He doesn't have to run for re-election. I'm so sorry, I don't know why that's happening. He probably can't run for re-election, and so why not? It's like YOLO. Like, I'm going to go out with a bang and do what I want, and that's kind of the vibe you're getting. Again, it's been a week, so like, give me a minute. But that's kind of how I feel about it right now. He's almost like a more mature version of the president who took office in 2017. Like, he graduated from high school and now he's getting his master's. That's kind of how it feels.
Okay. Seems like we're going to be hearing the word unprecedented a lot.
I'll try to say just that much.
No, you can say it as much as you want, but I mean, you're laying out a path for us.
We try to not say it as much now.
Well, now you won't hear it at all.
Yeah. But no, that's the right word to say.
Right. So I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently, as I'm a political scientist, a former journalist. Scholars tend to look at things through the lens of what they see. So I study authoritarianism and specifically Russia. So when I look at Trump, I see someone who's not interested in being a democratic president. Mm-hmm. He's interested in being an authoritarian leader. And even in you saying, well, he probably can't run for a third term. No, he can't under the current Constitution. But he's getting into our minds about, oh, maybe I can. So I don't see Trump interested in being a Democrat. And I think he might agree with me. So I'll just sort of leave it.
It's been interesting, though. There has been a member of the House of Representatives from Tennessee who has introduced a bill just to check that.
And that's why I said probably not do that. And that's the way we talk about Trump is also really notable. We have to measure everything. Like, this might happen, or it's probably not going to happen, but I guess it could. Those are the things that already cover him. So much of what you're getting at, all equals at all. Pick what.
Absolutely. And Megan, I'm glad you said that, because now I want us to go ahead and jump into the whole why we're here. And as somebody who has worked across, we may call traditional and digital platforms, emerging platforms, you've been with PBS, then we're Jazeera, Cheddar, to NPR. Tell us a little bit about how the approach to political coverage has evolved. Media has.
I think a lot about how news they are certain, and that And I think that some news have done a better job focus. I don't even mean just like digital. How do you get people are going, listen to them, hear them, see them, read them, watch videos about them, attention short. And so it's the most cogent and important details. Really, that is probably what I've different from when I was
A few years ago.
yeah 15 years ago. But is that when I was here, we were still very focused on social media. I was here, we had that then. And I went into TV, and that's what I have loved to do. And even that now is, so 3-minute packages are now 1:10, right? Same thing with radio stories. I used to be able to do a 6-minute radio story exploring, a place and people, and now I get 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So it's just condensing the information down to the very most important part and finding creative and innovative ways to say those most important parts that aren't just, bullet pointed lists of important facts.
And it seems like Axios, for example, an outlet sort of really leaned into that in terms of our collective intelligence maybe not being high bandwidth. So there's this rapid clip of information emerging. And you talk about the lean news. We're talking about Instagram. I've seen your Bishop Bureau on Instagram, huddled in a hotel room underneath blankets and pillows, to create a nice little studio to record his story, right? It's really amazing in terms of what committed on time, accurate, and we now have to think. Sarah, I want to go back to what you said earlier in the first question, specifically around your research, right? And so I will in our next section want you to talk more about your book. You do have a piece around Russia. You know that there is tension, obviously, between our countries, but I want to ask specifically about that political communication and your expertise there in terms of places you've observed, and let's say specifically Russia versus the US. How would you say these different media ecosystems inform our understanding of the challenges facing American?
That is a great question, which I would spend a lot of time thinking about. But just today, I was talking about the fact that understanding how citizens in authoritarian navigate, in other words, do they believe what they see in the news? So I studied that about 25 years ago. I went to Russia, and and this was when there was proliferation of media, and we were. And in the focus group, it was like, well, I hate the current. It's terrible. It's all chaotic. It's all, quote, tampons and great. And I'm sitting there as the American behind the screen, right? Speak Russian. Stick a Western. And I'm going, but don't you like media freedom? And they're like, no. We want media to just tell us best. We know things are a mess. We don't need the media to tell us that. And I'm wondering if we're just misunderstanding to a large degree how a lot of what they want from their media and their relationship. Because, of course, our theory as journalists, political scholars, is we give them the information they want. And maybe that's what we can take audience.
And so do you think there's a conflation or a crossing of the wires where we have segments of the public who say, we want freedom, we want democracy, they want it their way, but at the same time, they're also espousing what you just said about the people you were interacting with. They want to be told, too.
Right, so what do you want? You want to be told the truth? So do you want a bunch of facts so you can kind of make up your mind and then vote or do whatever? Or do you want to be assured and told that everything's okay and that we're going to do this one thing and your life is better? We're going to put on tariffs and then prices will go down. Well, that is completely it just doesn't make any sense at all. And yet, that's what watch Fox News want to hear. So really, I'm very not a journalist. Basically, I'll come back to this in a bit, but I think we're going through a crisis paradigm shift, understanding what journalists have done in the past, how they might need to think how to reach and engage.
One of my favorite classes in J school was media ethics. And, you know, I've been waiting for my oil to be changed or something, and Fox News is on in the lobby, and I'm listening, and I'm thinking to myself, and really dating myself too, like 15, 20 years ago, that would have never flown in a class like this in terms of professional. Please do, yes.
So a couple of things. A couple of good points I think have been brought up. The challenge I think now is we do have to meet people where they are, because there's so many different forms of media. People get their news from TikTok. You know, that's truly where some people are going to get their information. So traditional journalists or just companies in general have to figure out a way to reach those people, because that's also, you know, you got to make money. and I think that's something they have to figure out a way to reach those audiences, because the television audience is shrinking. And, you know, so that's why we're seeing these layoffs. We're seeing smaller news. So it is people, you know, we have to figure out a way to people where they are. And then another challenge is that it's people, because there's so many different types of forms of media and places to go, people are going to hear the voices that they want to hear. So they don't necessarily want the truth. They want the truth their way. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge. That's, you know, that's kind of what you're bringing up, is that, yeah, you can, if you want to hear it one angle, you can go watch Fox. If you want to hear another angle of the same topic, go watch MSNBC, you know? And I think that, and that's where a lot of people are going now. So I don't know, that's a unique challenge. I always tell people, if you just want the news, watch the local station, because they are just giving you the flat out news. No twist, there's no, there's you know, there's no bias, or at least they're truly not trying to be biased about it. But then the challenge there is people aren't coming home and sitting around the dinner table or sitting around, you know, as a family watching the 6 o'clock. And so I don't know, it is something that companies are trying to figure out how to deal with, but then it's also, you know, I don't know how we figure that out, because it's just, there's so many different ways that people are getting news now, and they want it when they want it, not when we're putting it out to them.
Well, Brie, let's lean into that a little bit more, because this is a great segue for a question I was going to ask. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. You really kind of went to where we were going. You have had such a tremendous experience, and you talked about local. You've gone from local to covering national. You've seen it all pretty much, right? And you've interacted with some people in major positions of power. Building on what you just said, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about maybe how your own approach to political storytelling has evolved, and what lessons from local news do you think national?
Connecting with viewers, I think, for personalizing stories at the local level, we're always told, you know, tell the story as if you're telling it to your dad or your mom or your aunt or whoever, and then make them feel something, have a character that they connect with. And a lot of times, in particular when you're talking about, you know, national politics, we're talking about, you know, we're kind of more so giving the two sides. So we're saying, you know, President Trump said today, here's what a Republican says about it, here's what a Democrat says about it, and, you know, here's where we're going from here, here's how we're moving forward. Where I think local, that's on a national level, but I think on a local level, we'll do a better job. And it's like, well, what does it mean to me? You know, and I think when we hear people talk about, well, you know, President Trump is going to impose tariffs, and this is going to help with, you know, everyday prices, and people don't understand to believe that, because they don't understand what that means. Where other people are saying, well, no, there's a good chance that prices are going to go up because stores now have to make up for, you know, whoever else raising their prices. So I don't know. I think there's just been a disconnect, and that's personally, that's something that I've been trying to figure out since the election. I'll talk to people that voted for Kamala Harris, but they were, you know, they also said, I'm okay that Trump won, because even though I liked Harris. I maybe for some reason I felt more, morally, I just felt better about voting for Harris is what people would say, but they felt as though, Trump would do better on the economy. And I'm like, more like, what do you think he's going to do? And they can't point to anything, but they felt as though there was a direct message that was hammered into their heads that since he said he's going to fix the economy, that's, what I believe, where they felt the Democrats' message all over the place. Didn't necessarily, if women's rights wasn't necessarily your driving force, felt that message didn't resonate. And I guess I don't know. I think local does a better job at that, but I don't know how you do that at the level. I think that's what more people are watching. And that's who has, that's who has the content, that's who has the source, that's who has the ability to go on the Hill, talk with people, say, talk with lawmakers, say, well, here's what, how we see.
Yeah. And Megan, can we kind of tweak the question for you as well, too, just in terms of your evolution from the various outlets are there things that you maybe picked up in one of your roles could have been better? Something at NPR you have initiated or tried worked really well for PBS?
So one of the driving forces at Cheddar, and I was on air for the first time and really excited reporting, was that politics is not really about policy, it's about people. And that was very similar to what you're saying. That is kind of what drove not just my own coverage, but the coverage I oversaw and as a how I content. I think that people lose sight of that, especially the Beltway and all of that. Inside the Beltway, people lose sight of that because we're so mired in what's happening in the federal workforce, what's happening in the federal government, how does it affect DC as a city, and it's hard to break away from that. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about tariffs, the people who are going to be most affected by that are U.S. Importers of goods and farmers, and who will be affected by retaliatory tariffs. Or if we're talking about
Immigration.
Exactly. We're not getting at the heart of and where the issue is. Not just here's the policy, but also here's the effect of that policy. And that doesn't actually always require you to have a character. Right? You don't need a person to be the face of that policy. Sometimes you just need to explain to people that there is a face of the policy and that it is playing out like this in these. And that, I think, is the most powerful journalism to be able to do. The breaking news journalism is so important, and the explanatory journalism, so much of what it does, sort of explaining big, complicated, wonky concepts. But at the end of the day, the people you're going to relate to most are people who are like you. And I think that what worked for Donald Trump on the campaign trail is that even though he himself is not necessarily someone that people feel like they could be, he is aspirational, right? He's a man who had a really successful career and became president, and then, fought back against what is seen by his supporters as a weaponized justice campaign against him, and then rose again from the ashes. And I think that story, if you don't take your sort of views of him and that story in with you, you miss the fact that for many, many Americans, he is their character. And what he wants and what he thinks is best is what they think is best. But one thing that I continue to remind as I look at midterm, because I cover elections, is that Donald Trump is the only candidate who can run on Trump's politics. He's the only one who's ever been successful on a large scale. And it'll be interesting if that stays the same as phases out of in a.
And I would agree with you. It's the brand.
Yeah,
but it's I feel like when Marjorie elected, that with a lot of people, I mean and that's why Trump is incredibly powerful, because so many people in Congress have just chosen, even though they initially probably reservations or even voiced reservations about Trump, they've gotten on the Trump because they elected, and they feel like that's a reasonable trade-off. Now, when Trump involved Congress, they may feel different. Trump always proved, against politics. All those things he could do. He may say, oh, that's like crazy political or whatever. So really interesting, because I think all of this is very true and nuanced, back to the journalists who do the work, but I think we're facing a whole exponential new level of crisis, which is the destruction of health. And I don't think Trump's been shy about that. He said, it would be better if I were always leader. A lot of, but I think really, thinking of ways to do that. So what do you do as a journalist? Because a lot of people are going to go, oh, it's that crazy NPR again, or whatever, So I'll just kind of leave that hanging out.
Well, please.
Just really quickly, because you mentioned, I think that Trump did something in politics which was brought to life politics for people who previously had not been. And that was people like her. She's a great example of what you saw, but you see that in people who go to his rallies. It'll be suburban moms with their 3 kids or 6 kids, or grandmothers who are talking about their concern about trans ideology, and you're wondering where this is coming from, and it really is sort of like an activation, political activism that somehow caught on in what he's seen. And I think that is what is different. You're right. She was able to get elected, but she wasn't someone who would have run for office 12 or 20. She wasn't in that space.
The real question is, why can't the other side, why can't they energize them?
Right.
And that to me is the best.
I think it's an important question too. I'll let you finish, because I'll hang on to this, something that I want all of you to.
Well, I think what drives Democrats is different than what drives Republicans. Because then on the flip side, I think I can't think of her name, but I think she's also from Georgia. Her son was killed at like the Lucy Bath,
yes.
and so what drove her to get into politics was that personal story of my son was killed. I see gun violence across the country. I want to make a difference. Whereas like Marjorie Taylor Greene is like, it's the fears. She's off of the fears of in some ways, for lack of a better way to put it, it's people that fear that they're being left behind, that the world is moving in a different direction. And I think the thing that Trump has done really well is you ask people, what does make America great again mean? It means different. And it's just because they're going off of a feeling. And so I don't know, I do think Democrats have found ways to energize. Like, think of AOC, I do think there are people that Democrats have found a way to energize that
Obama,
may not have.
Right. Barack Obama, exactly.
But it's different. Like it's a different feeling and a different reason why they're running. Which in some ways, scary. It's more of a reason that they're running in some ways. Like I can't think of any good policy, and I don't follow her that much, but I can't think of a good policy that Marjorie. And she's almost more of like therapy on Capitol Hill, not because there are a lot of good Republicans, that are trying to do good work. They just have to fall in line because that is their. So I don't know. I guess thinking about the people that I feel like the marginal, vocal minority people actually are the majority house.
Something that I think is embedded in a lot of what you're saying and go to is also a phenomenon that field and policy. Look, capitulation of some marquee Democrats toward Trump. Not just Eric Adams hoping for a pardon, not just RFK Jr. hoping for a cabinet, or Tulsi Gabbard. But it's interesting because we then start to get into some moral questions. What are your values? This is fantastic. So I want to get into that second part of how we you've provided us such great information to continue. Megan, I want to go back to you because you talked about midterms. I know privately we were talking about midterms when you were in Arizona. It's a good reflection of the fact that every year, I say this in my wonkish, every year is an election year, right? We have special elections going on in Prince George's County right now. Municipal elections, jurisdictions change obviously, but city councils might be odd years. right? And then we see all sorts of other offices for the even year. And some elections obviously get the lion's share. But Megan, I want to ask you, in your experience, in particular with midterm coverage, have you learned lessons about how you balance those immediate reporting needs with deeper analysis because it's so fast-paced? And how have you seen that pendulum swing back and forth?
The greatest difference I find between general election years and midterm election years is not that there's a huge difference in the offices we're electing, and I'll speak to the federal level, that's just what I know best. We re-elect all 435 congressional seats and a third of the Senate, so 33 or 34 Senate seats, every 2 years, right? That doesn't change. What does change is the attention on those races. Those races become significantly less important when there's a marquee presidential election. And I think that sort of the attention gets paid to those races after people have voted, to see kind of what did they do and who was going to have balance of power, as opposed to prior to voting when so much of the oxygen in the room is sucked up by the figureheads of the parties, whoever they end up being. But when you're in a midterm year, because you want to talk about the elections, you do get to learn more about the players and the candidates, and even in primaries, this interesting primary candidate and this interesting sort of anti-Trump Republican or pro-Trump Democrat in Washington State or Kansas or wherever. And I think that it comes down to the politics is about people, right? When you can give people someone that they can learn from, even if they don't agree with them, but like, this is why this person chose to run for office. I think that ignites for people a greater understanding of politics. All of that being said, that's an incredibly idealistic thing for me to say, because the reality is that midterm voter turnout is abysmal, right?
Yes.
It's so low. And even our general election turnout is not, I don't think that we need to cheer about it. I think that in general, we are a country that does not vote. And the greatest deciders of all elections are the eligible voters and frankly, registered voters who sit home. And that I think is the hardest story to tell. It's really hard to find Americans who aren't voting because they're not at the campaign events. They're not going to talk to you at the grocery store. They're not interested in talking to you about why they're not voting. It's hard to prove a negative, right? But that's the voice that I think is in some ways most important, because midterm, general election, off year, odd year election, like this year we'll have governor in Virginia again. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. A lot of people are going to sit home. And how do we, part of I think our role as journalists is to give everyone the information they need to make decisions. If their decision is to sit home, at some point in journalism, we have to sit back and let that happen. That's where other experts come in to engage. But it is hard to watch as sort of one of the cornerstones of democracy that journalism, I believe, is when people don't engage in that democracy.
Yeah.
Well,
And-
also, just to, if it's okay.
Please.
Yeah, just to say that, there is a movement to exclude people from voting, right? Particularly people of color, particularly younger voters, or anyone who might vote Democrat. And that's, to me, very unconstitutional. That's against, everything. And I think the coverage of that has been fairly good in the sense, and certainly media serve a really important civic function about telling people to vote. So, yeah, I think there are increasing structural barriers to voting. And quite surprising reasons why, when you have ID laws, many young people in particular don't have IDs. Yeah, they can't afford to get them. They can't take the time off work. They don't have them, so they can't vote. So it becomes a spiral.
Well, and just very quickly on the point about voting, we have a phenomenal voting team at NPR. We have reporters who just focus on voting administration. And, we did a poll right after the election, and we found that Republicans who had repeatedly told us throughout 2024, Republicans and Republican-leaning independents, that they were concerned about election security, that they were really worried about protecting democracy, that as soon as the election result came in, those concerns went away. Not in totality, right? But significantly. And that is important, because if Republicans are trusting in the elections, then that tells us something about where the mistrust is. but to that point, you'd think that now Republican administrations at the state level or even, in Congress would be less concerned about changing voting laws, and they haven't been.
No, because they're weaponizing the voting system.
There's been just as much focus on how do we change this system, despite the fact that voters right now, very comfortable with it. Kind of across the board, feel very good about the voting system. They're like, "Ooh, it works.
Yep.
That's so great." And Republicans are like, "Well, I mean, let's roll that back a little bit. It didn't work perfectly." And I think that is such a key differentiator, that when you come down to the voting administration, if you make it complicated enough, people are going to think there's something wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a good thing here in terms of what you're saying regarding information and education and the reporters that you have that are focused exclusively on voting and the objectivity that most of us hope comes with that, the importance of voting. And Sarah, I want to toss it back to you. I said that I was going to invoke your book, Seeing Red, right? And you explore Russian propaganda in American news.
Yes.
What lessons can political journalists learn from studying how disinformation spreads across media systems when it's not the fingers crossed, hopeful, objective truth to vote, when you inject propaganda? And we're hearing whispers of that more and more in American politics, that we're becoming more propagandized.
Well, I think events overtook my book. I mean, feel free to buy it, yeah. But I think that the main issue, or the main purveyor of propaganda, is now Donald Trump, right? So he's someone who is constantly pushing false information onto people as part of his narrative. Now he tends to echo some Russian talking points, which Russians then amplify, right? I don't think he's in the pay of the Kremlin. And weirdly, as someone who studies Russian propaganda, the biggest question I always get is, so what kind of video do you think they have on Trump? And I'm like, first of all, wouldn't know. Second of all, it doesn't matter. And third of all, if they had some, Trump would be like monetizing it. I mean, it's not, the guy's not like shy or worried. So I think that the focus has shifted from, sometimes, in particular, Russophobia was a point, that the Democrats just use Russia as, they amp up fear of Russia in order to attack Trump. And this all comes out of Russiagate and what went on in the 2016 election, in which the election did accept help from or consulted with the Russians and a lot of other things, which I won't rehearse right here. So what I learned there, I learned some painful lessons because I'm an ex-journalist. And I would say that one of the biggest takeaways I have is sometimes journalists at the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and really good places echo talking points about NATO and Ukraine because they sort of let Putin say, actually Ukrainians are Russian, or there are a bunch of Nazis in Ukraine. They generally don't amplify the Nazi one. But they'll say, NATO caused this. Like, we were promised, not one step further, east, blah, blah. All that's a lie. That's not true. That was never a promise. And there's this amplification of this false history, right? Or this rewriting of history. So I think when it comes to dealing with things that you're not so familiar with, a quick Wikipedia check, or the most commonly cited political scientist, it's really, and I'll kind of end with this story, is a guy at John Mersheimer at the University of Chicago, who happens to be someone who supports Russia's point of view that NATO encroachment made Russia feel threatened, so they were sort of forced to invade Ukraine. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that's essentially it. He's what's called a realist. This is not a majority position held by most American political scientists, yet Mersheimer is quoted more than anyone else. So why are you quoting the one guy? Yeah. And I get it. I used to be a journalist. I understand. But just because it's maybe a little bit of a niche thing, you still got to be that journalist, right? Yeah. And I was a little disappointed when I did the research for the book to find
Interesting. Okay. Brie, I'm going to bring it back to you for an additional perspective. We're on the campaign side. As someone who's moderated political debates, you've covered campaigns, lots of campaigns. What changes have you observed in terms of how candidates interact with journalists, and how should newsrooms adapt? Because there's a current emerging theme from something that happened this week that I want all of you to respond to, but I want to start with you.
It's like a test.
Pay
That's
attention.
a good question, and so I got to think about that. I mean, I think social media is probably the biggest change, being that to get their message out, people don't necessarily have to go on television. They don't have to go to a reporter. They can just put it out there.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the biggest change that I've noticed, because I think about, you know, gosh, my first television job was at WBOC in Salisbury, Maryland, and and it was who was it? It was like Martin O'Malley and Ehrlich were going against each other, and I just remember like it was a big deal. We're all at this like gaggle to get them at like one of the local fairs or something. Like that was like how people got, you know, sound bites from politicians that were running, and they knew that they had to do those, like kind of do the rounds and talk to all the different journalists. But now, yeah, it's just, you know, you put a message on Twitter and just let it fly, and you don't really have to interact with journalists as much, which, you know, you don't necessarily have to be held accountable that way.
And I mean, we've seen, you know, Trump the first time around in terms of how he interacted with certain people. Jorge Ramos, for example, not a fan, obviously. Jim Acosta, not a fan. And it's gotten to the point to where Acosta, now formerly of CNN, has been able to jab back, whereas some of our professional standards, maybe, you know, we want to take the proverbial high road and not engage with candidates like that. But you mentioned social media, and this is where I was going and would love all of your takes on this, is just this week, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt made her debut, and she dropped some knowledge on us that it wasn't just going to be credentialed journalists that will be allowed in the White House press room. Influencers, people who have large followings on social media. God forbid Joe Rogan is going to end up asking a question.
He will.
But you know what?
Well,
It'll happen.
it'll happen.
Hot takes on
Next
this.
week.
Yeah. Well,
Probably. We're moving at such a rapid clip, Sarah. You were probably predicting the future actor. But what are your hot takes on this? All three of you. We'll just go down this way.
I think it's, in some ways I think it's dangerous, because it allows people that maybe don't have the best intentions to have access. But on the flip side, I think because you have to meet people where they are, and there's so many different forms of media, you know, I think it's good in that way. I think until we know how they're filtering people, because, you know, bottom line is there's a process you have to go through to get a hard pass to, you know, to go if you're going like on a regular basis. So there's kind of like there's that, but I don't know. I mean, I'm torn, because it could be a good thing, because there's just going to be more opportunities for to get messages out to different people, but then who's going to be able to get into the briefing room and then ask questions, and what their intentions are.
So it sounds like you're kind of describing a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
right?
Perfect. It's double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about what White House access is like, because I think that people who haven't been there don't know. So there are different levels of access to the press spaces at the White House. If you are a credentialed journalist, and that literally means like even if you have a press credential from like the school paper, right? You can receive essentially a day pass, and you'll either be escorted based on your level of clearance, or you will be kind of on your own. And typically that's based on citizenship. If you're a U.S. citizen, they kind of let you wander. I don't know why, but you can't go anywhere, right? It's like one path, the one that you always see when people are doing stand-ups, you know, in front of the White House. There's that one Pebble Beach path, which is literally just a road, and it leads to the briefing room. That's the only places that press are allowed to be. Once you get to the briefing room, there's seats, and they're assigned, right? So NPR has a seat in the second row. When I was at Cheddar, we had a seat, and you know, organizations really fight to get that access, right? They fight to get those seats. But anyone can stuff themselves into that briefing room, and they will take as many people as can stuff themselves. So the seat part of it isn't even necessarily necessary, because during the first round of the Trump administration, those briefings were packed.
Yeah.
There were people from, you know, from their own blogs and their own YouTube pages and YouTube sites who just wanted kind of a piece of the biggest story that had ever happened. I kind of see this as once again, the master's degree of the briefing room, right? So we tried it that way. That got a little messy. The one thing I will say is typically a administration does not have a huge purview in who has access to press briefings, right? And once a partisan administration, be it Democrat or Republican, starts saying which journalists are allowed to cover them, that is where we run into problems with the White House Correspondents Association saying, actually, you can't pick and choose. They make the seating chart. The White House Correspondents Association is independent and nonprofit, and they do everything they can to ensure access and to make sure that there's a pool for every presidential event. And on top of that, the president is welcome to invite whoever he wants to cover him, and that's sort of what this is. But where it gets a little murky is in the picking who I want to cover me in these public journalism spaces. Public, it's still hard to get into the White House. Because that is a level that I think is going to be too far for some. Yeah. Too much interference from the press office.
And can I just add something quickly to that? Because I think it's good to kind of give the perspective of, how to get into the briefing room and all those other things. And the difference is also, if you looked at that first briefing and they showed, you've seen pictures, seen a lot, like a wide shot of it, it was packed. It had not been packed like that. Mm-hmm. During the Biden administration, but there was a different level because one of the differences, because I was working for Nexstar during the first Trump administration, and we would one-man band, and the thing that I did appreciate about that Trump administration was because I think everyone was winging it. They knew the importance of, in particular, regional media. So we had a lot of access, whether it was Nexstar, whether it was Sinclair, whether it was whoever. Mm-hmm. They gave a lot of the regional media access. And so there was a good opportunity. We'd get called on, and if we, in particular, if we went to the Gaggles, because it was no holds barred, and that's when they're on the South Lawn, he's leaving to go wherever, and he's just pointing at people. Difference between a Biden administration, they were more measured in who they were going to call on. So, it's, I guess, which one's better? Because it's, you think about the briefing room and you think about people being in the front row or whatever section, and a lot of times that's who the Biden administration was calling on, where, with the Trump administration, what you did see was, not to say that he would answer the question truthfully, but he would answer anyone's question, and he'd call on anyone, and so it's just one of those things where at least, you would have, people would at least have that access where, in the Biden administration, I remember at one time they got a hard time over him having a list of people to call on, and it's like, they weren't necessarily given questions in advance, maybe topics, or just saying, here's who we're going to call on, but where's if you're a journalist, where's the fairness in that, because then it's just like you're just allowing certain people or certain organizations to ask the question. So there's, I guess that's where the double-edged sword of the Trump administration comes in.
And I'm blanking. It was a show with a bunch of they were women journalists on the campaign trail. It was HBO and Max.
Oh yes.
And I'm blanking on the name. I liked it. It was only canceled after
they
one.
only had the one season, right?
The one season, but they did have an influencer, and there was sort of that was sort of a heart. Yeah. There was a clash, but also some heartwarming moments about sort of the sisterhood, right, of being storytellers, maybe not journalists with the influencer in the mix, but that was fiction. That was a story. So Sarah, what do you think?
Okay, at first I have some questions. Recently I found my Capitol Hill pass from when I was an intern at the Washington Post, and I'm like, I look so hopeful and so thin. But anyway, so my question to you, and you can tell I was a print journalist because I don't really get some of this stuff. How much does it matter if you're in the room? Is this just theater, or does this really matter for getting the story?
So I think in some ways it depends on the story you're working on. So in general, the journalists end up working together a lot. But if you're from, so for example, let's say you're from CNBC this week and you want to ask about DeepSeek and NVIDIA stock crashing and how the CHIPS Act is, this is a lot of stuff that none of you care about. But anyway, let's just say you're a business person. That's what you want to ask about.
Right.
You don't want to ask about the, Guantanamo Bay announcement. You want to ask about the stock market. And so you're not going to get called on 3rd or 5th or 10th and then ask about, immigration because you have your topic. the biggest story of the day tends to be the biggest story of the day.
Right.
And so what you'll find is that sometimes journalists will ask the same question different ways. The reason it's important from like a broadcast perspective is to show that you're in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
But from a just purely record keeping perspective, people want to be there because watching it, you miss little things like, you know, who on the press staff is laughing when a certain answer is given. And those things help inform your reporting in the future, right? If this is something that seems like it's a joke to this team, then maybe we should push on it a little bit. Or, you know, which reporters are showing up and standing on the edges and what outlets they're from. So some of it is just getting a vibe check, even more so than I have to be here to listen to this person talk.
And I hate to say this, but the White House correspondents controlling access to this, that's a convention, right? That's not a law.
Well, it's like a board. The White House, are you asking about the White House
So
correspondence?
you could change that, right? The White House could change that overnight, right? They could say, oh, we're not doing that anymore. We're just going to run our own press briefings.
So this
The White House, okay.
This
Okay,
happened in the, not exactly like that, but in the first Trump administration, hard passes were taken from journalists.
I vaguely remember that, yeah.
And those journalists challenged it on First Amendment grounds, and essentially almost all of them their hard passes were restored.
Yeah.
Because those are not issued by the White House, they're issued by Secret Service. The White House controls access to who gets the Secret Service form, and they tell you when to come for your appointment. They're your point of contact, but they don't issue the credential to enter.
Whew.
I know.
That's a lot, man. I
But-
thought being a faculty member was complicated.
But yes, in theory, they could just do whatever they want. The White House Correspondents Association knows, and I think that journalists should always remember, that even though there's new media and people can get their messages out, they still need us because we amplify it way further. And until there's a better way, they need us in the room, and so they're going to cooperate, generally speaking. And that's true across the aisle. Go ahead.
Well, no, sorry, because you made so many good points there. And I think, I do think this is going to, in particular with more new media coming in, it's going to challenge even the Correspondents Association because they set the rules. And I remember during the first Trump administration, there would be so many people there that they did start setting rules of you can't live stream, you can't do all these other things. But now that's what influencers do, know. And I think it is one of those things where I'm not saying that they will need to adjust that, but I think some of the adjustments they did, looking back, I think it was almost, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. It was very much benefiting more so to traditional media and almost not accepting of this is the way things are going. So instead of pushing these people away, we need to be more accepting and maybe find a common ground instead of just saying, because then it was no selfie sticks with, there were so many rules that they were starting to impose.
It's like Disney.
Yeah.
Like the parks.
Yeah, which I get, but at the same time, it's but now this is the way that people are consuming their news. So we need to be able to have, not to say that everything needs to be live streamed, but the reason why people had those selfie sticks because they were, they were just trying to get the shot and live stream and get information out. And that's kind of what people want nowadays instead of waiting till 6 o'clock for the networks to deliver it to you. And then another point that you made where I think the television is guilty of this more so than anything is that, asking the same question in a different way. I don't know how beneficial that is to the viewers because we're sticking on the same topic, but everyone wants to try to get that interaction so that they can have that two shot. So tonight when we're on the news, it's oh.
Here, I asked the question and here she answered it. Look at that.
They answered it 5 times already. And I do remember, I can't remember where it was, but I just remember when Putin had called out one of the reporters on it. I don't remember where they were, but it was at an overseas news conference, and he was just I just answered that question, and then called out,
Yeah, he's not going to play that game.
Yeah, and I got it, and of course I'm sticking up, and everyone's sticking up for the journalist, but then it was kind of but he's kind of right. Every person asked that question, you're just trying to get it for your networks. I don't know. I think there are just certain things that we need to do better so that we're not just focusing on us getting the question, so that more information's being asked But I do think, newspaper and radio probably ask better questions than television journalists. I just think everyone else digs a little deeper than we do. Sometimes, not all the time, but like on a...
Yeah, that's being a little unfair on yourself, because I think that, as you said, you are packaging things for a particular format,
Yep.
and that's just
Yep.
that's just the way it is.
We don't
Right.
get as in
Right.
depth, and
Right.
so
Got it.
sometimes, I know, because I haven't been in the briefing room since like COVID time, so just because but I guess I say that because I would always pay attention more so. Well, I kind of knew what the TV people were focusing on. I would sometimes pay attention more so to what print and other people were paying attention to, because then that made me think, maybe that's not a story we do today, but that's something I need to pay attention to down the line, or tomorrow or another day, because we're just kind of chasing the story of the day.
Well, let's move into part 3. The general big question for all of you is, where do we go from here? But I have some specific questions tailored for each of you. Sarah, I'm going to start with you, being on faculty, and then we'll move to our distinguished alumni. So as somebody who is in the academy, who is training future journalists, from your point of view, what are some fundamental changes you feel are needed in terms of how we train future political journalists?
This is a huge, I'll try to be for an academic brief, because I think our time is limited. So, the tradition has always been that you objectively go out and you get balanced information and you give that to the viewers, without fear or favor, right? That's what you do, or the audience. We are in a paradigm shift where people who are doing balanced and objective reporting are being overrun by a media ecosystem which is very profit-driven or propaganda-driven. So when it comes to the fight that we're going to have to defend our democratic institutions, I think journalists are going to have to choose. So as Christiane Amanpour said recently, I'm not here to be neutral, I'm here to tell you the truth. And if the truth is that the President of the United States is seeking to end democratic institutions, then all bets are off. I think journalists then have to pivot to become defenders of American democracy in a way they've always been, right? But I think they have to move a little bit more aggressively into the role of, yeah, we're not here to be neutral, we're here to tell you the truth is, and the truth is we're in a lot of danger.
So. Great, thank you. Yeah. Megan, same big question, but for example, in your current role at NPR, and please feel free to add and contextualize as you need to, how do you guide your team in maintaining editorial standards while adapting, just to keep on the theme that we've talked about a little bit, to some of these new storytelling formats and platforms?
I think that one of the things that I was talking to Eugene about before we started is the need to see every story in more than one way. So the best example I have is, when I was in school, people were taking their broadcast scripts and turning them into basically verbatim articles for websites, right? And it was just this very quick and dirty, let's just get it up on the website kind of thing. And now there seems to be more nuance into that. So you can watch a TV video package, or you can listen to a radio piece, and the digital isn't necessarily going to be word for word what you just listened to or just saw. To that point, though, I think that we need to think about each piece of the story for the audience it is for. And to that point, the person who's listening to the radio in their car, like I did on the drive here, is not necessarily the person who's scrolling through TikTok for their information. And those pieces of the story may need to be different. It doesn't mean the story is different or the takeaways are different, but is this radio voice the right voice to carry this 30-second snappy, here's what you need to know? Maybe not, or maybe it is. And so sort of seeing your stories in lots of different ways, I think, is the main thing that I feel is going to be different moving forward. To Sarah's point about the role of journalists, I think that 2016 to 2020 taught journalists, and 2021, frankly, taught journalists a lot. And I think that some of those lessons have sort of gotten a little rusty, and they're kind of shaking off the rust a little bit. But the main thing that I remember this being very, very hard during COVID, getting to the point where I was willing to say that the president was lying and stay on air. You know, President Trump has said, you know, X, Y, Z about COVID, and that is false. That's hard to do, right? Because you're trained. I mean, even just for me as a human, right, as an American, like, this is the highest office in the land, and it's a big deal. And you know, I was always taught to respect the office of the president, regardless of who was in it. And to call that person a liar, like, that's a big deal. And that's a change for journalists, getting comfortable saying, like, the truth is not, like, you know, the truth is the truth, and there are no alternative facts, and, you know, what is being said here is not correct, is a change. It's a change I think we need to become more comfortable with, but because it's constant fact checking, there is an ability for people to be like, oh, they're biased. And that's hard. And I don't think we have a good solution to that yet.
I mean, frankly,
So.
I'm always amazed to see how quickly some of the fact checking comes out, right? Because we're moving at such a rapid clip, we don't have the ability to keep up, right? And this time around, it seems even more rapid.
Yeah, that's quite
Thank you.
deliberate to undermine your sense of reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Bree, okay. You have a lot of experience. We've talked a little bit about breaking news, but you've also, you know, done the investigative side as well, right? How do you balance the pressure for this immediacy with the need for maybe that deeper political analysis?
That's a good question. I mean, I think people are trying to figure out how to do that now, in particular with going into this administration. Actually, I was listening to, I think that the Daily the other day kind of put a good perspective on what happens with this administration is they try to flood the zone. And so they throw so many things out there at you that you're trying to cover so much, and then you can only cover so much.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I guess to answer your question, it's almost, I think we're going to have to find ways to take, you know, instead of focusing on the shiny objects, throwing out whatever he's, you know, kind of trying to get us to focus on, really digging deeper into other things that he's doing. Because I go back to, like, what you were saying, you know, like, he kind of telegraphed what he planned to do. And I think even Democrats were raising the alarms with Project 2025, you know, kind of saying this is his playbook, he's going to do all this stuff, and now we're seeing it happen. But I don't know how many people really dug into, like, here's what this is going to mean. Like, here's what he's proposing, and this is the impact that it will have. So I do think moving forward, you know, my hope is that companies will do that a little bit more, but that's where resources will come in.
Sure.
And I do know that places are lean. I don't think they can stay lean. I keep hearing, you know, we're just trying to figure out this, like, where we're going to need resources and figure things out over the next couple of months. But I think with this administration, you can't afford to do the job on a lean staff. But I do think we need more investigative reporting and just more in-depth storytelling to kind of go back to what we've been saying, help people understand this is what this means for you.
Thank you. So much information, so many good things. As we prepare to open it up for Q&A, I want to ask you a couple more to sort of just transition into our audience questions. I want to get a little specific about what maybe makes Maryland and Merrill College specifically special in terms of your preparation or you in the classroom, Sarah. So, you know, as faculty and alumni respectively, how has your, for lack of better words, TERP experience influenced your approach to political journalism? Is there something special about being here?
Let's start with our alumni.
Yes, we come back and sparkle for you.
Yes, there's that, yes. What you were talking about, the training, and how do you think that influenced your career? What does being Merrill made mean to you?
I think the very obvious immediate answer is our geographic location makes covering politics and learning about politics really, really, really seamless. I was a CNS TV correspondent. Correspondent is like, it's a lot of term for what I was doing, but in 2010 during the fight over the Affordable Care Act, over Obamacare. And I got to go and cover things in Congress. I was like 20 years old and had no idea what I was doing with my like little camera by myself on the Hill trying to find parking. And, you know, all of that was like an unbelievable experience in hindsight, because I was there with all of these seasoned journalists who knew things about healthcare, and I was unsure, other than just sort of like, well, Maryland did this last year, so is it like Maryland's plan? That having that experience, and frankly, like being able to fail at it and know that like it wasn't going to be catastrophic, because that's okay, it's part of learning, really, I think, was such a gift in getting into the journalism field, getting my first job in TV, and knowing how to do everything, you know, knowing how to produce television and knowing how to find stories. And so that was the most valuable journalism experience to me, though those news quizzes.
Yeah, we still hear a lot about that. Yeah.
Close second. And the math test?
We have modified the Merrill F. We have modified the Merrill F.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's better. So you no longer get an automatic F on an assignment if you misspell a name. You are punished. I think we poke them with sticks.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really
Honestly,
know.
sounds better.
Yeah.
Do we still take the math test?
I will defer to my dean, Raphael. Do they still take the math? Oh, they.
But do they fail the class if they fail the math test twice?
No.
Okay.
No.
So we had that. That was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Bree, were you similarly hazed? I don't really.
I don't remember the math test. Yeah.
I can tell you, I was similarly
Yeah. I was like,
as well. So, yeah.
I wish I had gone to Merrill. I went to school without a journalism program, and I was editor-in-chief of my paper, and I really wish someone had had my back. But I think, you know, the students are amazing. They do amazing journalism. It's not just amazing for students, but just whether it's, you know, filing thousands of Freedom of Information requests to figure out how many people are dying in police restraints is awesome. And they're winning awards for their work, not just student awards, but regular awards. And the fact that, you know, journalism can be a very challenging profession. You know, we won't air that too much here because we don't want to discourage people. But the fact that, you know, you're still seeing these people come in with the fire, and you're seeing we're constantly thinking about, you know, what do journalists need to succeed? You know, leaning into data, leaning into visual, thinking about all those problems. And also our great alumni come back a lot, and they really support our students. So it's just, you know, at times when journalism can be a scary and even sort of overwhelming profession, I think Merrill is a great incubator of future journalists who are, in fact, what's going to defend our democracy. So I am very excited to get to work here all the time.
Awesome.
yeah. And then I will say, I think the kind of like the geographical thing is key, but I would also say the people, the professors. Dean Laurente was like one of my favorites. I'm not just saying that because he's here. But I think, you know, he challenged us, and even with the, you know, having the quizzes, making sure like if this is what you want to do, you need to stay on top of the news all the time, and just challenging us to be critical thinkers, and to kind of be, you know, just thoughtful, be ourselves, bring our perspectives, because all of us have different backgrounds, we have different life experiences, and it's important to bring that to journalism, because you're going to think about a story a different way than someone else may think about it. And, you know, I think I also had the privilege to, you know, Dr. Thornton was here when I was here, and, you know, I'm almost going to tear up because of it, but I think, you know, because she was one of the first, I think, Black White House correspondent for CBS.
She was, yeah.
And I just remember
First full stop, I think.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like being able to learn from her, because she was just, any question you had, I'd email her, and she was, you know, she'd get back to me. And I think just being able to learn from people like that, some of the best of the best, was just a privilege.
Yeah, that's amazing.
She's really missed.
Yeah,
She's
for sure.
Thank you all. This was amazing. I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness. Super informative. Eugene, back to you.
Yes, this discussion has been really wonderful at this point, and we want to give the opportunity for you guys to ask questions. So, for any of you who want to come down and approach the mic, and let's get a few questions in as much as we possibly can. I hope as people approach the mic, I hope that people have learned a lot here this evening about really what's been going on, because I do think that the value of what has been discussed this evening has been so important. So with that, you'll have the first question.
Hi, I'm Daniel Trielli. I'm a faculty here, and I'm also from Brazil. And it was interesting hearing you talk about the White House briefing room, because in Brazil, during Bolsonaro years, he just did away with all the briefings and would just live stream for 2 hours for whatever he wanted to say. And when he wanted to ask questions, he would just go into the fence of the presidential palace and talk to his supporters who were gathering there, and they would also live stream their answers, so completely bypassing the media. So maybe that's something that to look forward to in the next couple of years. But my question is, what do you need from us? As an institution, we're training new generations of students. We're doing research into journalism. What would be useful to have in this new generation of students that are going to be working for you? And maybe what would be useful to have in terms of journalism studies to maybe help you inform even better how to do your jobs or something like that, right? What can we do to help?
I think just making sure that they have multiple skills. They're multiple skilled journalists. So even if you want to be a television journalist, you're going to need to be able to do digital things. So I don't know. I guess for me, that's the biggest thing, where just being open and able to do multiple types of journalism, whether it's being on television, being able to write a newspaper story, or like a digital story, just being able to do all. Making sure students are skilled to do all those things.
Go ahead.
So there are a couple of things that I think we need help with, but the main thing I want to say is don't only pay attention to your students who are loudest, because there are going to be plenty of students who don't seem engaged, and I was one of them, who didn't get close to any professors and didn't really hang out in the journalism school, and go on and have really great careers. And part of the reason I come back every time they ask is so that I can say, like, guys, none of these people know who I am, but I went and I did the journalism thing, and I got to be a reporter, and now I'm an editor, and it's pretty great. Because you don't have to feel like there's one path to journalism. And I also think that one of the things that has really improved since I was a student is the understanding that being a successful journalist, like we were talking about, looks a lot of different ways and doesn't always mean working in news. And that's okay, right? I didn't go into news right away, and I needed a minute to think about it, and then I ended up there, and that was great. I know plenty of people who haven't, and they are just as happy. And it doesn't discount the education they had here at all. So
I just also want to make mention, really, and I agree with everything you all said, that the great thing about this school is that the skills that you learn really translate so much into different areas, no matter what. So that, and really the networking as well, is just so wonderful, and all. So yeah, go ahead.
Hello. My name is Nolan Rogalski. I'm a freshman here at Merrill, and my question to you guys, Professor Oates, you sort of touched upon it briefly, but there's been a lot of downplaying, I guess what our generation would probably call sane washing of some of the events of recent times, between the sort of media wavering on what to call a tech guru's salute to the crowd, and the events that are seemingly happening with construction in Gitmo. How do you feel that we all, as prospective journalists, and in the future as journalists, can help this general public that we have understand that there is a division between what is objective truth and what is politically neutral?
Ooh.
You're a
good one.
freshman and you're asking these
I am
questions?
also
Look at you.
very
That's great.
brave.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
speak for like the first year at all.
Wow. It's interesting because when Daniel asked that question and he said, how can we help them? I think we can help them by understanding how the audience processes that, right? Like, is there an objective truth? Well, that's tricky, right? Because, there is no such thing as objectivity. But, we strive toward it because in striving toward it, you do a better job than if you ignore it. So I also have been just enraged for the past 10 days. And you kind of reach a point where, what's even like the equivalent? Like what's reopening Guantanamo Bay. What a great idea, or that's not going to lead to any human rights abuses. I mean, do you guys feel like there's just been an impossible, in response to his question, it's just, there's been same-washing, or there's been this notion of inability to process or report on just how outrageous a lot of this stuff is?
I have two things to say. One is going to mention Elon Musk and his maybe Nazi salute. I've watched the video a whole bunch of times. I have no idea what he's doing. Honestly, he looks like a really awkward, like teenage boy trying to be friends with everyone. And that's kind of his vibe generally. But it doesn't matter what he meant to do or didn't mean to do, because people are going to view it the way they need to view it to reinforce their own ideas, right? So if Elon Musk did or didn't do a Nazi salute, he did one to the people who need that to be a Nazi salute, right? And that's where we struggle with objective truth, because it doesn't matter what an action is or what is said. People are feeling comfortable looking at these, borderline gray area things and growing from them. And I think that creates a challenge for frankly how we cover things, because there are so many conflicting opinions. Disinfo is everywhere. Part of what makes the Flood the Zone strategy so successful is that it does keep you from being able to touch all the things all the time.
Right.
So while you talk about having been, having these like overwhelming feelings of the last 10 days, mine have generally just been like exhaustion, just trying to keep up with all the things that are happening all the time, and and trying to stay on top of like, what is this executive order, and does it counter this one, and how does this one play in, and the OMB memo has been rescinded but not the funding freeze, so what does that mean? And these things are really hard, and it's an effective strategy because it's hard to keep track of it. During the election, NPR has a public editor. She works at Poynter. She's wonderful. We received the stain-washing question from the audience to the public editor. Why are you stain-washing Trump? Why do you not just say what it is he says? And one of the challenges with covering Trump is that I can't play 2 minutes of him every time I play him on the radio. There's not time for that. So some of it is not stain-washing necessarily, it's simplifying to try to make it make sense. And I think there's a difference there. And so as a consumer of media, it may seem like it's dumbed down or that it's stain-washing. But when you're creating it, when you're the name behind it, you're the byline, you're the person whose face is in front of the camera, it's your voice, think about it as a simplification, because people need things to be simple because they don't have time for them to be complicated. So I think that's probably the easiest way to think of it differently. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I think that genuinely people are trying not to make it okay to do shitty things. I think they're doing their best to try to explain 700 things flying at them at once.
I think that's a great point, but I think it's hard. I think, you go into journalism, they tell you when you're writing a story, see cat, say cat. You see something wrong, say it, like call a spade. So like sometimes when, if you know that that's a Nazi salute, like, I don't know what he was doing, and I think, throughout the campaign, we've seen Elon Musk so much that all of a sudden, we didn't see all this awkwardness, before, and now he does something that becomes outrageous, and I don't know his intention behind it, and so that's the hard part, and I think that's what you're going is that when someone does something, you don't know the intention, but I do think that that's just knowing what the base is, knowing who they're speaking to. It is hard to, see that and not say that. And I think that's something media organizations did struggle with. And I think everyone's going to have to figure out a way to work through that. Because even today, the president's talking about the helicopter and plane crash, and then he blames it on DEI. And it's like, what?
Well, and even more, I actually was going to bring this up earlier when we were talking, even more simply, he was like, we have no idea what happened and the investigation is starting. But I'm going to now run through all of the theories of what maybe could have happened. And we have no evidence of any of these things, but let me just list them for you. That is really confusing to people, right? We have literally no idea what happened. And he's like, I don't know, could have been the pilot of the helicopter. I don't know what's going on with their vision. Like, that doesn't help anything.
But not the fact that he decided to freeze hiring of air traffic controllers just days ago, right?
Right, and that air traffic control in general is an underfunded and understaffed field and has been for 2 decades.
Exactly.
But people don't. And actually, that's one of the things that we felt that NPR needed to do today was like, okay, here's what you need to know about air traffic controllers. Like, here's what you need to know about how to become qualified to be a pilot in the military, because
there's the fact this hardly ever happens.
Right.
I mean,
that's almost the level that we're at is like, okay, so you have to have 20/20 vision to fly planes in the military or to fly helicopters in the military, or you have to do this to be an air traffic controller. But I think that it's, sort of tongue in cheek, when does the DEI conversation stop? Well, it stops when the internet stops talking about it.
Or he stops talking about it. And I think we're kind of going back to the original thing. It's
cyclical.
like it becomes, it's wrong. It's because then someone asks, well, Mr. President, where are you getting this from? And then his answer is, well, I have common sense, and other people don't. Like,
I just know it.
At the end of the day, it's just like, you are the president, and in most cases, your job is to come out and say, this is a tragedy. We're looking into it, and that's it. To take it to that next step and not have any evidence, not have any support, that goes back to, like, we shouldn't have to start giving out facts. Well, here's what it takes to do this. Like, here's all the other things. It just needs to be to say, Mr. President, that's wrong. And what you're saying is divisive and hurting people. Like, we shouldn't have to give all this information about technically, like, you got to do this, that. It's just wrong. So I guess that's what we have to get eventually. And I do think, it's been 2 weeks, so, or I don't know how long, it's been a week, 2 weeks.
Oh, it hasn't been 4 years
since
last week?
Well, yeah, so it's been forever, but I think eventually what we need to learn from after the first administration, the first time, Trump was in office, was that we can't kind of waver and go back and forth and kind of tiptoe, like you said before. Like, traditionally, we would never call the president, a liar or say that's a lie, where now it's like, we have to, because that we need to start saying that and not have to kind of hold back. Like, we know this man, we know how he is.
It helps that we know him and we know how he is, because we were like very confused for the first 4 years, and now I feel like
and so now we know, and so it's kind of like we can't have that. In some ways we can't have the traditional politeness that we've had before.
Again, and it's, as you said, Megan, earlier on, even before we started this, he laid out his plan. Mm-hmm. He laid out the plan, and especially Project 2025 and some of the offers. So that's the thing right there. You've been waiting patiently.
Yes,
so
thank you for waiting
we'll take your
patiently.
last question here.
My name is Mackenzie. I'm also a freshman.
Amazing.
So
wonderful.
I'm thrilled with this.
This is great.
So when Trump was elected in November, MSNBC hosts like Joe and Mika from Morning Joe, they met privately with Trump and they reported it themselves. And a lot of the viewers were disappointed because they felt kind of like they were lied to, since they spent so much time like painting Trump as, kind of this like authoritarian and stuff. So how do you think in the next 4 years journalists can build these bridges back and like be in contact with like Trump and like other people from his cabinet while also still being fair and holding them accountable?
Yeah.
I think
think
a great question.
That's a great question, and I think what happened was a lot of people erroneously assumed that he was a spent force, so they didn't have to take him they sort of put him back into where he was in 2015. Like, we don't have to take this guy seriously anymore. He's a convicted felon. He's never going to get reelected, although whatever. So it's exactly the conundrum you were talking about, which is he's the president. So, you know, in American society, well, the president holds a lot of power, so it's important to cover what he does. So I think the MSNBC, I criticize Fox, so now I'm going to criticize MSNBC, you know, equal time. They just got to grow up and, you know, realize, yeah, he's the elected president. So, you know, you have to cover the elected president. And you can evolve and cover him in different ways. MSNBC generally, although I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with this, they adhere to, you know, professional journalistic standards, right? So, yeah. I do feel for media organizations, sometimes you just can't do anything right, you know? But what do you think about that?
I think in particular with the Joe and Mika situation, I do think, you know, there's a fine line. At the end of the day, MSNBC, Fox, and CNN, these are cable networks more so than, you know, your NBC nightly news, your CBS nightly news, things like that, where you're just kind of getting facts. So, you know, they're personality driven, and they are journalists, but they're not I don't know. I do think, in particular with their case, I do think as much as they would bash him and do other things, it was a big turnaround for them to say, well, now we're going to go down to Mar-a-Lago, because then there's so much history between them in particular, where it wasn't necessarily history just being as journalists. Some of it was seemed personal. So I think that situation to me seems a little bit different, because I do think other journalists said, you know, he is our president, we need to have access to them. And these were, you know, you think about, I guess, and on the NBC side, you think about like Kristen Welker, when she first took over Meet the Press, her first guest was Trump, you know, and so, you know, and she, you know, she did traditional journalism. She asked him tough questions, but there wasn't like this kind of like love. I don't know if love affair is the right word, but I don't know.
Love fest.
Yeah. Well, no, that love. Yes, but I don't know. So I do think that particular. I think people viewed that case with Mika and Joe, because Mika and Joe were also partly responsible for Trump's rise, because he was on that show all the time during his first, you know.
that.
Yeah.
Well, and Joe Scarborough was a Republican congressman.
Yeah.
So when you think about like journalists, I kind of want y'all to think about like what exists under a media umbrella, right? So at NPR we have NPR, right? But then we also have like music and Tiny Desk, right?
Yeah,
and like a Tiny Desk artist could come on and say something disparaging about the president, and I'm the one who's going to have to hear about that, right? Because it's part of the NPR umbrella. This is the Meek and Joe example is another good one. I kind of believe that if you're pissing everyone off, you're probably doing a good job. So, you know, if people are pissed off because the top talent at your network, or, you know, these purported journalists are, you know, being buddy with the president, well, great. I'm not, right? So it's holding yourself to the ethical standard of news, but it's also recognizing that there is news, and then there's news entertainment, and much of what is popular is news entertainment. But if y'all watch that for, you know, you watch MSNBC or Fox News or CNN, and I use Fox deliberately there too. If you watch like a live shot, like a regular news hit, it's full of really interesting information. But that's of course not what goes viral. Right.
It's almost like, I'm sorry to interrupt, Megan,
No,
but
you're
you know, it's almost like this is almost like the first take of, you know, journalism, you know, sometimes where it's, you know, everybody's just yelling at each other, you know, giving hot takes, that sort of thing, right?
Well, it's also, and let's not forget, in 2020, that the Fox News team calls Arizona, and basically, you know,
And they had a conniption, you know.
Yeah, and
so did AP.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, but
Fox did it first.
Fox did it first, and Fox did it in front of an audience where, oh my God, well, if Fox is saying it, then he definitely lost, because we know that, you know, this station has been, or this network has been pro-Trump. So, and it's also, it's really important to think about these differences, and they're great, you know, they're great journalists who work at organizations that maybe aren't great, right? So, I always thought that was really interesting. It's so weird. I've literally never watched an MSNBC analytics show. I've watched a bunch of Fox ones because for my work.
I think
I'm
you
so
should.
undereducated.
It's different, but similar in some strange ways.
Oh, I'll have to,
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
dive
Yeah,
into
it is,
that.
right.
Yeah.
But generally, the general thing that links all media entertainment is outrage, right?
Oh,
Like,
no, I can't do any more. of
I'm
that.
sorry.
Yeah.
It's a,
Are we gonna
everyone's
end?
outraged all the time about something.
Yeah.
We could go into a lot of discussion, folks, about the outrage and everything else, but I'm afraid that is all the time that we have got.
We are outraged.
No, I mean, we could go for hours and
Yeah.
hours and hours. I mean, as I said, I was like, I'm not even sure the hour and a half that we allotted for this was going to be enough to talk about all of this. But I hope we get to do this again at some point. So, folks, before we leave, a round of applause, please, for our panelists. and our moderators. Thank you
Great
guys
audience.
so much.
Great audience.
Guys, I really, on behalf of the Journalism Alumni Network, which, organized this and the collaboration with the School of Public Policy and everything else, I thank you guys so much. This has been a really, really fun stuff. I want to thank also as well our YouTube audience for watching, and really for all of you, thanks for coming. I mean, we have got some light refreshments out in the hallway, so do please help yourselves. Remember, do follow the Journalism Alumni Network on Instagram @jan@umd. We aim to put together events like this, opportunities for networking, opportunities for insight, build the community, build that knowledge. Because remember, it's not so much, you have to know stuff. Don't get me wrong. You've got to know stuff. But it is who you know that's going to really make the difference, okay, in terms of your jobs and everything else. Also, shout out to Dean Lorente over here visiting us. Thank you so much, for everything that you've been doing with the Journalism School. Really, really appreciate it. We are going to be sticking around, for a little bit to take your questions, any more questions, anything you have. Again, I thank you guys, and again, another round of applause for our panelists. All right. Thank you all so much, and have a great evening. Thank you.